Melissa stared at her reflection in the mirror, trying to hide the pain behind a fake smile. The bridesmaid dress Sophie had chosen for her was hideous, a muddy green color that made her skin look pale, shapeless fabric that hung like a curtain. Sophie had called it unique and fun, but Melissa knew the truth. It was a setup. Sophie, her best friend since childhood, had always liked being the center of attention. Now standing as the bride, she made sure no one outshined her. "Perfect," Sophie said, walking in with her makeup artist, pretending to fix Melissa's hair. "You look simple, exactly what I wanted for my theme." Everyone laughed. Melissa's heart sank, but she said nothing. She wasn't here to fight. She just wanted to survive the day and disappear quietly afterward. Hours later, the wedding hall glittered with chandeliers and roses. Guests whispered, cameras flashed, and Sophie glowed in her gown. Melissa stood behind her, forcing a smile, every photo a quiet humiliation. Then the groom's brother arrived, Lucas. Tall, calm, dressed in a black suit that turned heads. He moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. His eyes met Melissa's, and for a brief moment, she felt seen. Not judged, not mocked, just seen. During the ceremony, Melissa stood beside Sophie, holding the bouquet. She leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't forget to stand back a little. You're blocking my light." Melissa stepped back, hiding her embarrassment as laughter rippled from Sophie's bridesmaids. When the vows ended and applause filled the air, Lucas came to the stage, congratulating the couple. His smile was polite, but when he turned to Melissa, it softened. "You must be the maid of honor," he said. Melissa nodded shyly. "Just a bridesmaid." "Funny," he replied. "You carry yourself like someone who deserves to be honored." His words stunned her. For the first time that night, someone had said something kind. Sophie interrupted, linking her arm with Lucas. "Oh, she's just Melissa, my forever single bestie. Don't take her too seriously. She gets flustered easily." Lucas glanced at Sophie, then back at Melissa. His smile turned sharp. "Then maybe that's what makes her different," he said. At the reception, music filled the hall. Sophie danced with her new husband, and guests cheered. Melissa stood near the bar, sipping water, trying to fade into the background. Lucas appeared beside her, his voice low. "You look uncomfortable." "I'm fine," she lied. He studied her. "You're kind, but too forgiving. I've seen women like you. People use your light, then mock your warmth." Before she could reply, Sophie's voice rang across the hall. "Melissa, come on, everyone's waiting for your speech." Melissa froze. She hadn't prepared anything. Sophie hadn't told her she'd be speaking. The guests turned toward her, waiting. It was a trap. Melissa walked to the microphone, hands trembling. Sophie smirked from her seat. She took a deep breath. "Sophie and I have been friends since childhood. We've seen each other at our best and worst, but today I realized something. Sometimes love isn't about being perfect. It's about forgiving the people who don't know how to value you." The crowd went silent. Sophie's smile faded. Lucas's gaze locked on Melissa, proud, impressed. Melissa ended the speech with grace. No bitterness, no tears. She simply walked away. An hour later, Lucas found her outside near the garden, sitting under the fairy lights. "You handled that beautifully," he said. She shrugged. "I didn't want to ruin her day." He smiled faintly. "You didn't. You just showed her what real elegance looks like." They talked for a while, about life, lost friendships, hidden pain. Lucas confessed that his brother and Sophie's relationship wasn't as perfect as it looked. "He almost called it off last month," Lucas said quietly. "But Sophie knows how to play the victim." Inside, the laughter turned to arguments. Sophie was yelling at her husband, the crowd whispering, cameras capturing every second. When Sophie stormed out, makeup ruined, she saw Melissa and Lucas standing together. Her voice cracked. "Are you two enjoying my misery?" Melissa stayed silent. Lucas replied calmly, "You built it yourself." Weeks passed. The wedding video went viral. Not because of Sophie's dress, but because of Melissa's heartfelt speech. People called it the speech that silenced a bride. Sophie's marriage fell apart within months. Rumors spread and she disappeared from social media. Lucas and Melissa kept in touch. He'd call her just to ask how her day was, send her coffee at work, sometimes show up unannounced with flowers. One evening, he stood outside her apartment with a nervous smile. He said, "I've been thinking, you don't belong in anyone's shadow. You deserve to be loved, loudly." Melissa's eyes softened. "And you're sure you're ready for that?" He took her hand. "I already am." Months later, when Melissa walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered softly in the sun, there was no jealousy, no competition, no cruelty. Just peace. As she looked at Lucas waiting for her at the altar, she thought back to Sophie's wedding day. How humiliation had turned into freedom. How heartbreak had led her home. The sun had barely set on Melissa's new life when the first message arrived. A simple text from an unknown number. "You stole my happiness. Enjoy it while it lasts." At first, she thought it was a prank. But the next morning, Lucas found a bouquet of dead roses left at their doorstep. No card, just the scent of decay and bitterness. Melissa's hands trembled as she picked them up. She knew that handwriting. The jagged letters on the tag spelled one name: Sophie. Lucas wanted to go to the police, but Melissa refused. "She's just angry," she said quietly. "Maybe she needs help." But inside, she felt the old ache return. The sting of humiliation, the fear of becoming someone's target again. Weeks later, Melissa opened her email to find Sophie's face on her screen, a viral post where Sophie accused her of stealing Lucas and ruining her wedding. The comments were brutal. Strangers called Melissa a homewrecker, a liar, a manipulator. Lucas tried to protect her, but the damage was done. Melissa's job began to suffer. Her clients pulled out. People whispered when she entered the room. That night, as she sat beside Lucas, she whispered, "I thought I was done with her." He took her hand. "Then we end it this time, for good." They didn't have to look far. Sophie was living 2 towns away in a run-down apartment above a beauty salon. Her once perfect image was gone. Her hair messy, her eyes tired, her social media filled with cryptic quotes about betrayal. When Melissa knocked on her door, Sophie opened it slowly, disbelief written across her face. "You have nerve showing up here," Sophie hissed. "I didn't come to fight," Melissa said calmly. "I came to ask why." Sophie laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Why? You stole my happiness. You humiliated me. Everyone loved you after my wedding. You became the symbol of grace and forgiveness. And me? The monster." Melissa felt pity instead of anger. "You did that to yourself, Sophie." Her eyes glistened. "You think you're better than me now, huh? Wait till the world sees what you really are." Before Melissa could respond, Sophie slammed the door shut. A week later, a scandal broke. Someone had leaked photos and private messages from Melissa's phone, taken out of context, twisted into lies. Her career was on fire again, her peace shattered. Lucas found the source. Sophie had hacked an old email account. But this time, Melissa didn't cry. She just said one thing. It's time she learns what real consequences feel like. Lucas had friends in high places, lawyers, journalists, people who owed him favors. Within days, the story flipped. Screenshots surfaced of Sophie blackmailing others, faking charity donations, and posting under fake names. The same public that once praised her beauty now turned on her with fury. One night, as rain poured over the city, Sophie called Melissa in tears. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Make them stop. They're ruining me." Melissa's voice was calm, steady, cold. "You started this war. You thought pain would make you feel powerful, but it just made you small." There was silence. Then Sophie whispered, "Do you hate me?" Melissa took a deep breath. "No, I pity you, but I'll never let you hurt me again." And she hung up. That night, Melissa stood by the window watching lightning flash across the sky. Lucas wrapped his arms around her. "It's over," he said softly. She nodded. "Maybe for now." Months passed. Life began to settle. Melissa returned to work and her reputation slowly healed. She and Lucas were stronger than ever, partners, friends, soulmates. But one morning, she received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside, a single piece of paper. "Thank you for teaching me how to lose. S." She didn't know whether to cry or smile. It was the first time Sophie's words hadn't carried venom, just exhaustion. Melissa placed the letter in a drawer and whispered, "Maybe you'll finally find peace." Years later, Melissa and Lucas had a daughter, bright-eyed, kind, with a laugh that reminded Lucas of her mother's courage. They named her Hope. One spring afternoon, while walking through a park, Melissa saw a familiar figure sitting alone on a bench. Sophie, older, thinner, eyes softer. She was feeding stray cats, her hands gentle, her smile small, but real. Their eyes met. No words were spoken, just a nod, a quiet understanding that the war was finally over. Time has a way of healing wounds, but leaving scars as reminders. Melissa often thought about the girl she once was, the one humiliated in an ugly dress, mocked in front of strangers. That girl had died the day she stopped chasing validation and started valuing herself. At a charity gala years later, Melissa stood on stage receiving an award for women empowerment. Lucas sat in the audience, proud, clapping the loudest. She spoke with grace. "There was a time when I thought forgiveness meant weakness, but I learned that forgiving isn't about letting others win. It's about freeing yourself from their hold." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. In the back row, an unrecognizable Sophie watched quietly, tears glistening. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is peace. As Melissa stepped off the stage and Lucas took her hand, she whispered, "It's finally over." He smiled. "No," he said softly, "it's finally beginning." And with that, the lights dimmed and the story of humiliation, heartbreak, and rebirth came full circle. A journey from pain to power, from betrayal to love, from revenge to redemption. Hope grew up in a home filled with warmth, laughter, and lessons about kindness. Her mother, Melissa, always said, "Never let people decide your worth. Let your actions speak louder." But sometimes the world doesn't listen, especially when envy walks in dressed as friendship. At 22, Hope had just graduated with honors and landed a job at a fashion design firm, the same industry her mother once left behind. Her designs were fresh, emotional, and full of meaning. That's how she met Clara, her manager's daughter. Beautiful, confident, and always smiling a little too wide. Clara pretended to be her best friend. They went to lunches, shared secrets, even worked late together. But beneath the surface, Clara was collecting Hope's ideas, stealing sketches, taking credit, and whispering to others that Hope was only successful because of her famous mother. She ignored it at first, just like her mother once did. But when her entire collection was presented at a major event under Clara's name and the audience cheered her genius, Hope felt her world crumble. That night, she sat in her car, tears streaming down her face. Melissa called her. "You sound broken," she said softly. Hope whispered, "I finally understand what you went through." Melissa's voice steadied. "Then do what I did, sweetheart. Rise. Don't beg. Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just shines." Hope took a week off. No posts, no calls. She vanished from the scene. People whispered she had quit. Clara celebrated her success, posting interviews, smiling for cameras, unaware that the storm was quietly building behind her. When Hope returned, she didn't come back as a designer. She came back as a brand. She launched her own label, Lunaire, inspired by the moon's calm strength. Every design told a story of women who had been silenced, mocked, or underestimated. And every piece carried Hope's signature mark, a small embroidered H hidden in the seams. The brand exploded overnight. Celebrities wore it, magazines featured it, and interviews flooded in. During one televised interview, a reporter asked, "There are rumors your former colleague Clara helped inspire these designs. Any comment?" Hope smiled. "Inspiration can come from pain, but pain doesn't get credit. Growth does." The audience erupted in applause. Back at the office, Clara watched the interview, her face pale, her phone silent. Invitations stopped coming, partnerships pulled out. Her name, once on every designer's lips, began to fade. Months later, Clara showed up at one of Hope's fashion shows, uninvited, desperate, shaking. Backstage, she approached Hope, tears in her eyes. "Please," she said, "I need work. No one will hire me. I made a mistake." Hope looked at her, the same woman who had stolen everything and mocked her dreams. "You didn't make a mistake," Hope said quietly. "You made a choice." Clara fell to her knees. "I was jealous. You had everything, the family, the love, the talent. I just wanted to be seen." Hope sighed. "Then maybe you should have learned to stand on your own light, not steal someone else's." She turned to leave. But before she did, she added, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean trust." Later that night, Hope showed clothes to a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, and Melissa watched proudly from the front row. Lucas whispered, "She's her mother's daughter." Melissa smiled. "No," she said softly, "she's stronger." A year passed. Lunaire became an international name. Hope was invited to Paris, Milan, and New York, her designs now symbols of resilience and grace. But even success carries its shadows. Online gossip began again, this time accusing Hope of using her mother's fame. Instead of denying it, she responded with a viral post. "Yes, I'm my mother's daughter, and I carry her lessons like armor, not privilege." The post shattered records. Women across the world shared it. It became a movement. #LunaireLegacy, where people posted their stories of pain turned into power. Melissa cried when she saw it. She said, "I spent years healing my wounds. She's turning hers into art." Hope hugged her. "You showed me how." But one day, Hope received a letter in the mail, written in the same looping handwriting her mother once recognized immediately. Sophie. The letter read, "Your mother forgave me. I never forgave myself, but seeing what she built and what you've become gives me peace. Tell her she won." Melissa read Sophie's letter in silence. Years of old memories flashed. The humiliation, the speeches, the pain, the peace. She folded the letter gently and placed it beside her wedding photo. "She finally found peace," Melissa whispered. That evening, she and Lucas sat on the balcony watching the sunset. Hope joined them, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Do you ever regret forgiving her?" Hope asked. Melissa smiled softly. "Never, because forgiveness didn't save her. It freed me." Lucas squeezed her hand. "And it gave our daughter wings." Years later, when Melissa passed away peacefully, Hope continued her mother's legacy. At her memorial, Hope stood before a crowd of thousands and said, "My mother taught me that revenge doesn't always burn. Sometimes it blossoms. Sometimes the greatest revenge is building a life so beautiful that your enemies find peace just by watching it." As the crowd applauded, a single white butterfly fluttered through the garden, landing on Hope's shoulder. She smiled through tears. "Hi, Mom." And just like that, the story that began with humiliation and heartbreak ended with legacy and light. Proof that even the deepest pain can bloom into power. And that forgiveness, not fury, writes the strongest ending of all. Hope never chased love. It found her, quietly, unexpectedly, through a charity gala her brand sponsored in New York. That's where she met Ethan Blake, a journalist with sharp eyes and a disarming smile. Unlike others, Ethan didn't flatter her. He challenged her, questioned her motives, asked why she turned pain into fashion. "Because," she said, "every woman deserves to wear her survival like armor." He smiled. "Then I'd say you're designing courage, not clothes." They started seeing each other. Coffee after meetings, long walks through Central Park, late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. For the first time, Hope felt seen, not as a brand or legacy, but as herself. Months passed. Ethan became her anchor. Her laughter returned, lighter, freer. He helped her write a book proposal, Stitched Souls, a memoir blending art and healing. When the manuscript was accepted by a top publisher, he hugged her tightly and whispered, "You're unstoppable." She believed him. She believed in him until the night the truth came crashing down. Hope was in Paris, preparing for her spring collection launch. A journalist friend sent her a message. "Is it true Ethan Blake is releasing an exposé about your brand?" Her heart froze. She clicked the attached link. There it was, a teaser headline on a major magazine. "Behind the Seams, the Untold Story of Lunaire's Hidden Empire" by Ethan Blake. She felt her knees weaken. Her phone slipped from her hand. Ethan had been interviewing her, recording her, pretending to support her, all while preparing to publish her private words. The man who said he loved her had been writing her downfall. Hours later, Ethan called. "Hope, please." "Don't," she said coldly. You lied to me for a headline. It's not like that, he pleaded. They pushed me. I didn't want to hurt you, but you did. And now the world will see me through your version. She hung up. Then she called her lawyer. She wasn't going to let her mother's legacy become tabloid gossip. The article dropped a week later. It painted Hope as a manipulator, claiming she used emotional trauma for marketing. It exposed personal messages, private sketches, things only Ethan had access to. The internet exploded. Hashtags turned cruel. Hashtag Lunaire Lies trended. Sponsors backed out overnight. Hope's silence was deafening, but deliberate. She refused interviews, refused to fight back publicly. Instead, she gathered her team. I built this brand on truth, and truth doesn't need defense. It needs clarity. She released a campaign, unedited. A raw, emotional video featuring real women sharing their stories while wearing her designs, each one saying, "This is my pain, and it belongs to me." The video ended with Hope's voice. "They told my story without my consent. Now I'm taking it back." It broke the internet. The comments turned. The hashtags flipped. Hashtag Lunaire Unedited became a global movement. Ethan's credibility shattered. His magazine pulled the article. He tried to reach her again, but Hope had already rewritten her narrative. A month later, Ethan showed up at her studio. He looked hollow, exhausted. "I lost everything," he said quietly. "My job, my reputation. You were right." Hope didn't look up from her sketches. "You didn't lose everything, Ethan. You gave it away." He swallowed hard. "I thought if I told your story, I'd finally be seen, but all I did was destroy the only real thing I ever had." Hope finally met his eyes. "You wanted fame. I wanted peace. Now we both know what those cost." He stepped closer. "I never stopped loving you." She smiled sadly. "That's the tragedy. You never started loving me. You loved my story." He left quietly. That night, Hope walked into her design room alone. On her work table was the first sketch she'd ever made, a dress called Forgiven. She whispered, "Mom, I understand now. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." 2 years later, Hope stood backstage at a global summit for women leaders. She was about to speak to thousands. Her company had rebounded stronger than ever. Her book had become a bestseller not because of scandal, but because of resilience. When she stepped onto the stage, the crowd roared. She took a deep breath and said, "I was betrayed by someone I trusted. I was humiliated in public. But here's what I learned. Revenge doesn't mean ruining someone else. It means refusing to let them ruin you." She paused, her voice steady. "Pain can break you, or it can brand you. I chose to make mine a masterpiece." In the front row, Melissa's photo sat on the table beside the microphone. Hope smiled at it. "Mom, I understand now. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom." The crowd stood. Applause thundered. A single spotlight bathed her in gold. And for the first time since the betrayal, Hope didn't feel broken. She felt complete. Because the story that began with humiliation had now come full circle, not as tragedy, but as triumph. The daughter of revenge had become the face of redemption. 3 years had passed since the scandal. Hope had become more than a designer. She was a symbol of healing. Her brand, Lunaire, opened global branches, mentoring survivors of betrayal, abuse, and loss. At one of her workshops in London, she met Dr. Adrian Cole, a quiet psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. He had kind eyes, the kind that didn't pity, just understood. He'd read her memoir, and when they spoke, he didn't mention fashion, fame, or pain. He just asked, "Do you ever rest?" She laughed softly. Rest feels dangerous. When I stop, I start remembering. Adrian smiled gently. Maybe that's where the healing starts, when remembering stops hurting. For the first time in years, Hope didn't feel the urge to keep her walls up. Adrian wasn't like Ethan. He didn't chase her story. He respected her silence. Part 22. Their friendship grew in quiet spaces. Shared coffees, midnight talks about purpose and survival, long walks by the Thames where neither needed to fill the silence. He taught her how to breathe again, to live without always fighting ghosts. But peace was fragile. One evening, Adrian handed her a file. He said, "I need to tell you something before someone else does." The file contained his research, a government-funded project on the psychology of revenge survivors, and on the second page, under case studies, was her name. Her chest tightened. She asked, "You studied me?" Voice trembling. At first, yes, he admitted. Your story helped me understand resilience. But when we met, I stopped. You became more than a study. Her eyes glistened with fury. You should have told me. I know, he whispered. And I'm telling you now because you deserve truth, not discovery. She stood silently for a long time before saying, I don't know if I can trust you. Adrian nodded. Then I'll wait until you can. Part 23. For weeks, she avoided him. Her old instincts returned. Distrust, anger, self-defense. She threw herself into work, expanding her foundation into Africa, Asia, the Middle East, but every new achievement felt hollow. One night, as she packed for another international summit, she found a small envelope in her sketchbook. Adrian's handwriting. Inside was a note. Hope. I never wanted to understand you for a paper. I wanted to understand you because you reminded me what surviving looks like. I fell for the woman behind the armor. If that costs you my trust, I'll accept it. But don't let fear build your next wall. She cried for the first time in years, not out of pain, but out of exhaustion. Because deep down, she knew he hadn't betrayed her. He'd simply been honest too late. And honesty, even when delayed, was better than deceit, beautifully told. Part 24. Months later, Hope was invited to speak at the World Humanitarian Awards in Geneva. She walked onto the stage, calm and radiant. Her speech was simple, but every word felt carved from her soul. I used to believe revenge was power, but revenge only silences others. Forgiveness silences the pain. As the applause faded, she saw Adrian standing at the back, watching quietly, not intruding. Their eyes met. She hesitated, then smiled. After the ceremony, she approached him. I thought I'd never see you again. He replied, I promised I'd wait. She took a deep breath. I can't promise I'm ready, but I'm not running anymore. He smiled gently. That's all I needed to hear. Part 25. Spring returned to Paris, the city where Hope's pain once began. Now she stood in the same atelier where her mother used to sew late at night. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the mannequins dressed in her new collection, Renewal. Each piece told a story, not of vengeance, but of transformation. One design was called The Letter, inspired by Adrian's note. Another phoenix, stitched from fragments of discarded fabric, broken pieces reborn into beauty. Adrian entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He asked, "Still the same order?" She smiled, "Still the same heart." They stood together in silence, watching the city outside. Finally, Hope whispered, "You know, my story began with betrayal." Adrian nodded. "And now?" She turned toward him, eyes glowing. "Now it ends with peace." He reached for her hand, gently, as if afraid to break the moment. Outside, church bells rang across the Seine. Hope closed her eyes, breathing in the sound not of endings, but of beginnings. Because for the first time, her life wasn't about revenge or loss or proving strength. It was about living fully, fearlessly, and free. And as she whispered to the wind, "Mom, I made it." The story, the pain, the rise, the fall, finally came full circle. Not as tragedy, not as revenge, but as rebirth. 5 years later, Hope and Adrian were married quietly on a spring morning in Tuscany. No press, no cameras, just vows under olive trees and sunlight that felt like forgiveness. They built a life that wasn't perfect, but peaceful. He continued his trauma recovery research. She expanded her brand into a foundation supporting women rebuilding after betrayal. Together, they created something new, the Renewal Project. But peace never stays untouched. One morning, Hope received a letter from a law firm in New York. The sender, Ethan Blake. The letter was short. "I'm dying. There are things you deserve to know. Please come, one last time." Hope stared at the page, her hands trembling. Adrian found her sitting by the window, letter clutched tight. He read it, then quietly asked, "Will you go?" She whispered, "I don't know if I can." He said, "Then I'll go with you." New York was colder than she remembered. The city that once burned her was now just noise and steel. They arrived at the hospital, sterile lights, soft beeps, the faint smell of regret. Ethan was a shadow of the man she'd known, pale, frail, oxygen tubes tracing across his face. When she entered, he smiled weakly. "I didn't think you'd come." Hope stood still. "I almost didn't." He coughed, then said, "I wanted to tell you the truth. That article, it wasn't just ambition. They blackmailed me, said they'd destroy my career if I didn't expose you." I was scared. Hope's eyes filled with silent tears. She said, "You could have told me." He admitted, "I was a coward, but I've carried it every day since." Adrian stood in the corner, listening quietly. Ethan looked at him and said, "You're lucky. She doesn't just forgive. She transforms." Hope took Ethan's hand gently. "She forgave you long before this," she whispered. "But I never thought I'd say it to your face." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then maybe I can die lighter." Moments later, his monitor went still. Hope didn't cry. She just closed his eyes softly, whispering, "May your story finally rest." After Ethan's death, the media tried to revive old wounds. Headlines resurfaced, twisting the visit into gossip. Hope ignored them all, but deep inside, she felt something shift, as if a final thread of her past had been cut. Back in Paris, she decided to retire from fashion. Her last show would be called Closure. The runway was unlike anything before. Minimalist, quiet, drenched in light. No theatrics, no sound, just music that pulsed like a heartbeat. Each design represented a stage of her life: pain, revenge, forgiveness, peace. When the final model walked out in a gown named Elysium, the audience rose in silence. It wasn't applause, it was reverence. Adrian watched from backstage, tears in his eyes. When Hope stepped forward, the crowd erupted. She bowed deeply and whispered to herself, "This isn't the end, it's release." Months later, Hope and Adrian moved to Florence. They bought a small villa surrounded by vineyards and golden hills. Life became quiet. Morning walks, evening wine, laughter echoing through stone halls. But one afternoon, Adrian collapsed during a lecture. Diagnosis: heart condition, severe, worsening fast. The world that Hope had rebuilt began to blur again. She sat beside him every night, holding his hand, refusing to leave his side. One night he said softly, "Promise me something. Anything. When I go, don't wear black. Design something bright, something alive." Her voice broke. "Don't talk like that." He smiled weakly. "Hope, you've spent your whole life surviving others. Promise me you'll live after me." Tears fell silently. She kissed his forehead. "I promise." Adrian passed away on a golden morning. The sun was rising, painting the room in light. And for a moment, she could swear she heard his voice saying, "Breathe, Hope. Keep creating." A year later, she held her final exhibition in Florence. It wasn't about fashion. It was art. Each frame displayed fabric fragments shaped into hearts, wings, silhouettes of memory. The collection was titled Life After. During the closing speech, she said, "I began my story trying to destroy pain. Then I learned to turn it into beauty. But love is what finally set me free." As the lights dimmed, a montage played. Clips of her journey, her mother sewing, Ethan's smile, Adrian's laughter. The audience wept. Outside, under the stars, Hope stood alone, wind brushing her hair. She whispered to the night, "I've forgiven the world. Now I forgive myself." A shooting star crossed the sky. She smiled softly, because the girl who once lived for revenge had become the woman who lived for peace. And her story, once born in betrayal, ended not in anger, but in eternal grace.